Welcome to this video. Thanks for tuning in. Sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome, and welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness in the highest levels of love light. I just want to go into a little flow, a little energy share, perhaps a little light language. Yesterday I did an energy update. It really wasn't as much of an energy update as it was just a kind of a sharing of what I was experiencing and seeing in the collective. And so I invite you to go back and watch that if you feel called to. One of the things I wanted to share was we're all going through a lot of integrating, myself included, and the more patient we are with each other and the more patient we are with ourselves, I wouldn't necessarily say the easier that it is, but the easier it can be. And while many of us are shifting in and out of these vibrations of higher frequencies, lower frequencies, integration, peace, joy, bliss, frustration, confusion, sadness, we oscillate in and out. And I would venture to say that many of us are continually doing that as part of our journey and part of our experience. And so that was a recap of what I had said last time, which is let's get out of judgment about ourselves and about other people's processes. And the other thing I wanted to share in regards to that was I do notice there's a lot of individuals that I work with who are really caught in a trap, can't get out, caught in this cycle of thinking that because of their past lives, because of their karma, that they are not able to proceed to the next avenue. They're not able to see clearly. They cannot move into the next stage of development because they are unable to let go of this idea of previous trauma. And I want to just talk on that briefly because yes, there is trauma that is held in the cellular memory of the body, that is held in the memory of our own consciousness, we could call it that. And that is certainly something that we are really encouraged to work through, integrate, heal, process, and essentially move through and digest so that we can utilize whatever's in that experience for us as fuel for more. And simultaneously, sometimes it's just about letting it go. So I've mentioned this before because I've worked with people who have, been in that deep state of, well, I have fear around this because in a past life I was this. And that's normal. Many of us have experienced that. We may have been traumatized in previous lifetimes. We may have been traumatized in this lifetime as a child or as a teenager. And I've talked about my own personal story, and I acknowledge and recognize others who have also been traumatized in those lifetimes and in this lifetime. Been there, done that, right? And there comes a point, though, when we are being invited to recognize our own power now. And that is part of the embodiment in this life, in this reality, on this earth. Whether this earth is Eartha, Terra, Gaia, Earth, whether or not we are Palladian, Arcturian, Andromedan, whether or not we were abused or not abused, whether or not we were perhaps ostracized in a past life, all of that is relevant from one perspective. And while we work on this healing journey and this experiential journey, we can begin to dissolve and integrate those components of us that no longer serve our highest potential from my perspective. And everything I share is my own perspective. Some people are in a space where they're not ready to heal their trauma. Some people are in a space where they don't realize that they are ready. And others don't want to let go of it because it's become so much of who they think they are that it's almost seemingly impossible for them to move past it. And so everyone is in a different place. They're at a different crossroads. But from my perspective, we're really being invited to acknowledge where we're at and allow ourselves to move through that field, move through that that feeling, and make the appropriate adjustments to come back into our own space and place and time. And I'm bringing up time because in actuality, when those traumas took place, that's a play on words, they took place, they took something at a particular place in our lives, or we gave them a certain amount of energy at that particular time in our lives, whether it's this lifetime or the past lifetime. And until we can come to the place in our lives where we can say, I now dissolve that because I no longer need it for my highest potential of growth and expansion. And we then take, I'm shown like placement, like a place card setting. I'll just draw it really quick. So essentially what I was shown is, we'll pretend this wave is a timeline. And let's say at this particular time, we experienced a great amount of what did I say, grief. We lost a loved one. We felt neglected. We had a great, something happen in our lives. And this node, this little bubble, is a piece of information. It's a place card holder. It tells us where we were, how old we were, what we were thinking about, what we were feeling, what we were experiencing. And this becomes a node, we'll say, of information. It can be a memory, it can be cellular, it can be stored in the body. I'm being called to bring up what they talk about in cranial sacral when you've had a somatic emotional release. It releases if you fall. Let's say you fall and you hit your elbow and it spreads to your hand, it spreads to your wrist, even though this was where it started, at the elbow, right? It goes up to the shoulder. So I'm multi-dimensional, looking at this from multiple angles. So what happens is this node is, let's say, the fall. And maybe the fall was because we were pushed, we were bullied, or perhaps we were abused by an adult. And this node becomes a place card holder. And this place card holder is a wound, right? And this wound carries a vibration, a frequency, and then it connects with all of our future pieces of information and further high points and low points. So now 5 years later, we're abused again. Maybe we get in a relationship because we are holding on to that trauma, and we believe that in order to feel love, we must feel like we are unworthy. So we find someone who makes us feel unworthy because that's what our parents made us feel like. And I'm just using this as a major example. And then we continue in that cycle, right? Now this is, or we fall again because we're not paying attention, or because something triggers us, or let's say we get into another circumstance. So there's so many different ways of looking at it, you guys. We carry trauma in so many different ways. And for anybody who's been through therapy or has done a lot of healing work, a lot of meditation, a lot of counseling, a lot of any type of therapy, really. It can be energy work. It could be Reiki. It could, now I'm not comparing those. Yoga therapy. Anytime we move and we communicate with our bodies and we give ourselves permission to acknowledge what we've been through, feel the feelings that we might have experienced when that trauma occurred, we're doing the work, we're healing. Some people, though, get addicted to the work because that is this, it's like a momentary high. And so I'm going to come back to this happy high, right? And then all of a sudden that happiness kind of fizzles out. We go back down into grief. This is all sometimes part of the process. Sometimes it's part of our journey. Sometimes it's part of our experience. And so there's no wrong or right way, from my perspective, in which we move through these experiences. However, if we can bring ourselves to this space energetically, and we can really feel, and again, I'm bringing up cranial sacral because it's such a powerful healing modality, we can sometimes clear all of that energy that was the place card holder in that moment of time. And it gets brought up in the body so it can be dissolved. And then all of a sudden, it's not necessarily connected in the same way. Now I'm going to go into this a little deeper. Now it's just there. It's not to say that we make it as if it didn't happen, although in some cases it no longer becomes relevant. And that can also sometimes get smaller and smaller until it's a little tiny speck. What happens is all of these other future connection points no longer are held by the same place card holder. It no longer holds the same charge, the same memory, and the same distortion, or the same feeling in our field. And we're then able to process these other moments, place card holders in time, a little bit differently. We might feel different about the other traumas that we may have experienced, because now when we clear that energy and we integrate it, our perspective that is held around those experiences changes. And so these points in time, these collection points that collected energy, perhaps, and stored information about us are more accessible. They become more easily understood. We start to feel more at ease, we could say, about certain things. And in essence, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning about these past versions, they no longer become as relevant to our experience now. And one might say, by us dissolving these, becoming aware, even the happy moments, we don't want to lose our happy moments, but everything that was attached to that particular loses its connection. And then we end up becoming more now. And it's not to say that all of that dissolves, but you can picture all these little dots then maybe spinning and coming into a centripetal or center space, where now we feel perhaps less scattered, less pulled in all these different directions, and a little bit less, we're more complete, more whole, more integrated. And that line or timeline, from my perspective, becomes more of this tightly wound coil that gives us the ability to see, rather than it's so far away, we can see it now, we feel it now, and we experience it now as the person that we are now doing the work, or just being present. And then that just helps us to kind of absorb, we could say, these aspects of us that want to be seen, that want to be heard, that want to be clear, released. And when I say they want to be, let's say we're in a timeline where we recognize that we were, in a past life, we were part of the Roman army and we did some naughty things. I mean, how many people really probably were part of the Roman army that have reincarnated or have soul aspects connected to that particular timeline? And so in this lifetime, we might carry the traumas from that, or maybe we were a person who was ostracized for being a particular religion. And so now we're afraid to perhaps participate in any type of religious experience because of that. And you could fill in the blanks, whatever that looks like for us. My point is, we're essentially then able to take our power back, because that moment on that line took something from us. Better spoken, we gave it part of our power. We gave it or kept it locked away because we were ashamed or we were fearful or whatever it might have been. And again, I've talked about this creating a ripple in the timeline. Sometimes there's major events. If you go to, let's say, a battleground, we'll talk about battles like at the Civil War. If you go to these battlegrounds, there's stuck energy that's inside of the earth, and there's pieces and parts that come in the form of plasma or emotions, sadness, anger, whatever it might be. It's all held, encapsulated in that place card holder. It places a mark in time. And so from my perspective, many of us are being called to call back those marks in time. We're beginning to feel less attached to this particular timeline, reality, idea of who we were. And that can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I'm really being called to talk about this a lot because it's relevant for so many people right now. Now, on the flip side, it also means we can sometimes become, some people want to deny that aspect of themselves, and that's a whole other video. But we're really being invited not to deny it and not to necessarily embrace it as if that's who we are now, because we're not. So again, doing whatever we need to do in this moment, such as cranial sacral, such as, I don't know, float, they have, or chiropractic, or qigong, or tai chi, or you know, going to a beautiful sacred site and meditating, prayer, breath work, kundalini yoga, all of those things working in unison to just help us feel whatever it is we need to feel. That was the biggest message that's coming through. Whew, and I got goosebumps on that one. Yesterday, I pulled the cards for the 1111 portal, which was Gypsy, Sagittarius, movement, freedom, right? Grounding our energy, pulling it in through the crown. It might be working with color therapy. It might be going and doing a past life regression. And again, recognizing that that past life regression is an aspect of us that we're calling back, and then we're integrating it, because that's not who we are right now. Yes, we are someplace else in another dimension, perhaps. But who we are right now is here on Earth, Terra, Gaia, whatever we want to label it as, in this body with our friends and family that we've chosen to connect with now, even though our friends and family might also be connected to those other reality timelines. But by us doing that work, we are creating a vibrational frequency in which we all are fluidly connected into. So the more people that are doing the work, the bigger effect it has on this field. Therefore, the bigger effect it has on everyone else that are sharing this field with us. So that's the message that I was kind of getting this morning. If we want to look at the sunshine and rainbows just for a moment, I'll just go into that briefly. There has been so much going on inside the earth. There's no doubt in my mind that all of us are feeling it. This can also trigger some of those memories because things are being activated from our ancient past and our ancient future that we might feel a deep connection with. And this can stimulate certain insecurities. It can also stimulate heightened senses of awareness and feelings of love and appreciation. So let's go to that other. I started talking about the trauma, but this also has to do with, okay, I'm being called to talk about this briefly. There's also this concept that I'm recognizing that what used to make us happy no longer makes us happy. Therefore, many people are struggling finding that happiness. And if I go back to that timeline, it's because they were looking at that moment at 20 or 15, you know, where that's what used to make them happy. And because those were such big moments in our lives, we sometimes feel that we need to go back and relive that moment. And we can sometimes when we're doing this therapy and working through these sessions. But we're also being really called, whatever that looks like, yoga, again, fill in the blanks. But we're also being really called to just create our own happiness now for who we are now. It may not feel the same way that it did when we were 20, 17, 15. Although I will say sometimes just eating an ice cream cone can make me really happy. Back like when I was a kid. So some of those basic elements of looking at a butterfly, being out in nature, that's something that's in us because we're connecting with something bigger, yet intrinsically part of us. So I'm sharing that because these memories that we've had as a person named Joe, John, Sue, Beth, whoever, that holds all those other memories, but that person is changing, morphing, and shifting. So the things that might make us happy may also need to shift. So how we find our joy, how we find our bliss is also shifting for a lot of people, and that's okay. We may not want to go on a roller coaster ride anymore or go to an amusement park. We may not want to watch the same movies we used to watch. Sometimes that can create a sense of confusion because we're used to associating our happiness with these node points, with these place markers in time. And I do recognize sometimes I'll go back and watch the Goonies and I get happy because it does take me back to when I was that age watching that movie, feeling like a kid and the excitement, not exactly a kid, but yeah, I mean, you get that excitement again of we're recreating it. But again, that's kind of the theme is what are we recreating and why? Do we need to continually recreate this connection to that particular place marker? Or can we let that go and know that it doesn't mean we're losing part of ourselves, but we're still giving our energy to it and start to give our energy to something that's in the now moment? Simultaneously, we can be processing that memory while creating something new. And that's the real multitasking, right? So oftentimes we can utilize what is really divine truth. And I brought this up in my video yesterday because, yes, it's true. You might have experienced something when you were a kid. That's true. But is that the ultimate truth? No, that's only part of the piece of the puzzle of the innate energy that moves through all things. So that's only a teeny tiny little aspect of the bigger picture of Joe, John, Beth, Sue, right? So the universal truth is air, water, elements, butterflies, animals, puppies, right? These are things that are, and even those aren't technically, because maybe in another dimension or reality, those animals don't exist. But here now, they do. Boy, I can really just keep going and going down this rabbit hole. Keeping it simple really does mean keeping it simple at this point. And we're really being called, from my perspective, to really simplify things. And sometimes the best way to simplify things is to find life's simple pleasures in order to give us that happiness. And these simple pleasures are things that warm the heart, the true universal connection to source. And sometimes we find that true universal connection to source through looking in the eyes of a puppy, right? Feeling that love that's just innate within them. And that might be just what we need to break a thought pattern, break a cycle. And then we start to find other things that bring us those moments, those teeny tiny little place markers in time of joy, bliss. And the more we begin to feel into that, the more we create our reality from that new version of us, from one perspective, if that makes sense. So we've got a lot of solar activity. The sun heats things up, in case you didn't notice. It heats up feelings. It stirs the pot. it pops the popcorn, right? So I'm being called to use that as an analogy. You have a piece of popcorn, well, it came from a corn stalk that came from a seed that had to be planted and grown and sown and brought up, and then it had to be taken out of the earth and brought to having the kernels removed, and then they're processed so that, so there's steps to all of this. So ultimately, when that corn kernel pops into popcorn, it's alchemizing into something that we can now eat, something that we can now utilize for nutrition. And I know some people would argue, well, popcorn isn't nutritional. At one time, it very much was. And I do feel that we're going to get back there eventually once we kind of get through this process of recognizing that we need these seeds that are innately part of our earth to continue prosperity as this human having this human experience with the best relationship with nature, and stop trying to chemically change what is something that naturally occurs for our own good, for our own value, for this beautiful connection that many people have kind of lost, in part because of man interrupting the process, interrupting the natural cycle and feeling like it needs to be changed somehow because it wasn't already perfect. And that would be untrue. So, sorry. So what happens is then we're being called to allow ourselves to alchemize. And so when we are in a place of fear about what's happening with the sun, we're essentially creating from that place, rather than just recognizing that everything has a cycle, everything is a process. And we are all in that process of alchemizing with Earth and the sun and the planets and the animals and with each other. I had a vision of these storms that have been experienced lately, especially in the United States, stirring up the water. And this, I was kind of shown, was necessary in order to move certain things to where they needed to be. And we sometimes view these things as man-made. We sometimes view these things as a negative. And in some cases, that is true. However, oftentimes, some of the things that are negative, we're actually countering. And I was writing this down. So for every balance, right? So for every dark, there's a light. For every good deed, there's a bad deed, or whatever. And that's an old paradigm of looking at things for balance. But from what I'm being shown is things are being balanced a little differently now. The scales have shifted. And that, of course, leads me into Libra, right? Libra into Sagittarius. The scales have shifted to a different diagonal. And so how we measure good and bad or balance is also different. And so I'm being called to invite everybody to stay out of fear about what's happening on the planet, because there's so many of us that have tipped the scales in our favor. Ooh, that's a play on words, but I'm hearing do, re, fa, mi, sol, la, ti, lo. How do I always mess up those scales? But I do. But favor, favor, flavor, flav, that has shifted. So essentially, because many of us are processing our trauma, not going into fear all the time, allowing ourselves to feel without pushing away our feelings or judging others for what they're experiencing. Many of us are already doing that. And we have literally tipped the scales in such a way that the way in which we interact with the earth and the way in which she interacts with us has also shifted. So therefore, some of these events that are happening are actually triggering a higher alchemy, whether they're man-made or not. Back to that popcorn. We can take something that may have been created that is not necessarily sunshine and rainbows. That was the intention behind it. We become aware of it and we shift the frequency around it. And all of a sudden it disables or counterspins, counteracts the original intent that it was created for. And I'm going to bring back, everybody talks about the inversion and the inverted matrix and the inversion of a lot of our symbols that have been taken, spells that have been taken and flipped. Well, we're flipping it and reversing it back. So flip it, reverse it. Anyways, so what happens is, oh, that's such a play on words. I'm having this memory of when, which was a node point for me a few years ago with the Missy Elliott song. I'd been singing that with a few of my sisters, and it was just like, yeah, flip it and reverse it. Reverse it. The verse, the verbs, rewrite it. So essentially, it doesn't mean that we're acting as if none of this ever happened, but we're integrating it so much and we're spinning it out so much, it's already been spun out. Therefore, we're really being called not to give it any more energy. And it's not that we're ignoring it. We're just creating it such a high frequency that or state of being, that the older state can no longer exist. And we're watching those remnants that we're trying to hook in literally dissolve and disintegrate. And I had shown this line, and I'm being called to kind of go back to that, right, with these nodes. And so if we are dissolving that big one, and it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and disconnects, it gets integrated, absorbed, composted into usable energy, or it gets taken and utilized somewhere else because the universe energy never dies, theoretically. And energy goes someplace that it can be utilized for balance. So what I was shown is that's been so imbalanced for so long, it came to a point where we made a choice. We made a decision in this experience, in this lifetime, that that's no longer the pattern that we want to co-create from and within and with each other. So that is shifting. And I keep hearing dynamo. So dynamo, it reminds me of a star. It's type of energy. Dynamo, won't you blow? Dynamo, won't you blow? So we're doing it in this time because of the planetary alignments, because of how warm the sun is. And there's more to the sun and what's really going on, but that's not necessarily what I want to get into right now. Because of this conjunction that all of the planets are offering, and if you think of the planets, I'm being called to share this, what I was shown. And for you astrologers, you'll know, this is obviously, you know more than I do about this. But so when I look at astrology, which I don't very often, but let's say this is the Earth, and here are some other planets, and I don't even know, I think they all go around, they're all connected, right? These are nodes. This is a crystal lattice work. This forms a shape, a geometry. It forms a vibration. And so right now, if that sun is shifting, helping to shift that frequency and that vibration, everything responds. So a lot of the ideas or concepts that it's responding and it's negative and these things are going to happen, that may be true based on an old cycle or node that may have happened that's no longer relevant. And this is just one vision that I've been shown, and this is a multidimensional perspective. So again, is that the universal truth? That's not what I'm referring to, but let's say this is Earth, and now down here was an older version of Earth. And on this node, there were some cataclysms that happened and battles that happened and so on and so forth. We're not destined to repeat those same cycles from my perspective. And because now we're in a bigger version, we have a different representation or geometric structure connected to this Earth. So what I was shown is this Earth has been absorbed by this Earth from one perspective. Now we're in here. And if in here we have heart-centered, centripetal collective of beautiful light workers sending out this frequency and vibration that are changing the cellular structure of everything we come into contact with from one perspective energetically, that means the Earth is vibrating in a different frequency than this version was. And that cycle is not going to repeat itself in the same way. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't things that aren't going to happen, but what I'm saying is our relationship with them is different, and how they might unfold might look different than what we expect based on what we've seen in the past. So if that makes sense. So that's another reason why my guidance team is continually saying, let go of our expectations. Because when we expect something based on old patterns, we're actually creating from those old patterns a little bit, right? Because we are remembering that node, that access point, those emotions, and we're going back in time and pulling up those emotions with fear and distrust and apprehension and anger. Even though we might have more love, we're a different person. We're not that same person, but we're still pulling all that stuff up. But if we can process all of that and integrate it, we won't necessarily hold that vibrational frequency moving into this next dimensional access point, which is what I've been shown has happened. So now I think many people are starting to let go of these expectations of where we're going, how things are looking, and all of that, because we're creating in much more of a real time now, which brings me back to what I was sharing at the beginning of the video. Letting go of these things, it doesn't mean that we are saying it didn't happen. It just means that we're able to integrate the fear around what might have happened, the grief that might be associated with what's happened. And that leads me into the next topic. There have been planetary wars, struggles, strifes, in which we have been demolished from one perspective. And so sometimes that's held within our cellular memory, in our DNA, and we might remember those traumas. And when we hear things about these solar flares, it might put us back into, oh no, everything, our Eeyore mode. So we're really being invited to say, where are these memories coming from? And are they still applicable for what's happening now? Because I don't think many of us are realizing now this changes the relationship with all the planets. And let's pretend now this is a person. All of these connections with these other people also create this crystal lattice work, or the grid, the matrix, in which we all play in, the field. So when we make these adjustments and we allow ourselves to expand out into this bigger version of us, expand out into this bigger version of Earth, we can then shift. I'm hearing a domino effect, right? We then begin to shift front, back, up, down, in, and out, how our reality is building itself, constructing itself because of our energy exchange with that reality. So, I wasn't planning on going there. Let's talk about some other good things on Earth. This is all good stuff. I mean, there's going to be things that don't look good because of our perspective, and not everything is sunshine and rainbows, because this is a free will. We have choice, but we're being called to recognize that in every moment we have the choice to go back into our heart and operate from less ego, less the need, less of a need to control others, less of a need to have outcomes, people, places, or things look a certain way for us, so on and so forth. And then that begins to soften the energy. And we begin to then work with the energy in a very different way. I'm hearing mathematically shift the directive, because this is all science. This isn't just a bunch of woo-woo stuff. We are vibrational beings. We are making a sound, a song, and we are tuning into our environment as it tunes into us, like a tuning fork, a symphony. So some people may be experiencing how they interact with their reality in such a different way that it can be, what I'm hearing is dislocating. We can feel dislocated. Like when a joint pops out, you have to kind of work it to get it back in, and it might feel a little pain around that area for a little while. We might be feeling inflammation, right? Because of this disjointedness and this, when we have different aspects of ourselves that we're calling back, remembering, interacting with, and also each other all at the same time, it's like we begin to, we can feel a little muddled, but this too shall pass. And so again, getting grounded, getting in the water, setting our intention to just pull everything back into the center so that it can be, I love using the word integrated because it's just such a good word for this, but that's why I call what I do energy integration. What many energy healers do. We're integrating those parts of ourselves, parts of our cells, parts of our memory, parts of our thoughts, whatever it might be, back into a place of balance, back into a place of sustainability. I think I'm going to end on that note. So, and don't forget to breathe. So in love and light, I hope this made a little bit, helped give a visual and a little bit sharing about what I've been seeing happening in our reality. This is ongoing. I could give specifics about a lot of different things, but that's not what I'm here to do. Many of us are using our intuition, and we can kind of see probabilities unfolding. We can start to feel into the authenticity of certain individuals that are stepping into our awareness. And these predictions can also change and can also shift. I will just say that there's a deep sense of discord and disharmony, in part because of this disjointedness that we're all feeling. Yet once everything clicks into a space of resolution, where we become resolute in our expansion and our journey, and we recognize that we're not going to be pulled into more discordance. We're not going to get pulled off track. We're not going to leave or give away part of our energy in this moment that's going to get stuck in this timeline and then create another node that we always have to come back to. We're really being called to recognize, are we doing that? And utilize this portal to just take with us this compassion and heart-centered awareness and strength, resoluteness that we have in order to create the appropriate combination, like a combination lock, that is key for our own evolution and expansion in the higher, I would say, realms, but it's really now here in this realm. And that creates this complexity, meaning flavorful. Like if you drink a wine, it's complex. There's a lot of flavors that go with it. It creates a complexity in the simplicity of just being, again, I'm going to go back to the puppy, going for a swim in a river, going skiing and really watching the snowflakes fall, sitting by a fire and connecting with the fire, letting everything kind of go in that phoenix rising energy, getting in water and watching everything we don't need just clear away, utilizing all aspects of our environment for us to expand in, because everything can be using crystals, drinking tea, connecting with the herbs. I mean, really simplifying takes us out of the disjointedness of all of this other information that we might be processing simultaneously. So, in love and light, guys. Namaste.